welcome to another episode of the Carolyn Glick Middle East News Hour. Today I have a special program for you. I'm going to be joined by my co-host Gadi Taub and also by our dear friend Lee Smith, the best-selling author of The Plot to Overthrow the President. I think it's called, about the deep state coup against President Trump.
And the permanent coup, the second, the sequel. Yeah.
Right, the permanent coup. And so there's Gadi already chiming in. But
hello from Tel Aviv.
Hi. So we wanted to talk about
that's to say, Caroline, Charleston, we have a problem with the deep state. Yeah.
Yes, Lee is in Charleston, and Gadi's going to allow me to finish my opening by shutting up. So let me just introduce this show, right, Gadi?
Yeah,
you're allowed to say yes. Anyway,
yes, sir, ma'am.
Right, and this isn't. And the strange thing is that this isn't a rehearsal. We're actually taping this, and this is going to be seen by other people. So look at how much we like each other. No, just kidding. Anyway, but the reason that we wanted to have Lee on the program today to talk to us is because there are talk is now abounding about former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu making a plea deal with prosecutors to end his legal jeopardy in the trial that he's having on graft charges. And there are so many parallels, and we've been struck by them from the outset of the Trump administration, really, between the legal fraternity and the media's hounding of Benjamin Netanyahu and their attempt, now apparently successful, to oust him not only from office of prime minister, but perhaps, if he takes the plea deal, from political life, from public life, from political life in Israel. There are so many obvious parallels between that and the Trump-Russia collusion conspiracy lie that Lee Smith has really been one of the pioneers of covering and exposing in the US media. So we wanted to talk about that, and just briefly to bring everybody up to speed who hasn't been, scope locked on what's happening in Israel. So everybody who's been watching this program knows that Netanyahu was indicted on 3 counts, or three charges. One having to do with where he's indicted for bribery and breach of trust, and the bribe that he ostensibly received was positive coverage or untoward receptiveness of a media organ for his interests in exchange for regulatory favors. So as Gadi and I have been documenting, the case in court has utterly destroyed the claim of bribery or regulatory favors, and that's the sort of flagship charge that Netanyahu was indicted on, and is falling apart. Another one is influence peddling with the owner of Yediot Achronot, one of Israel's major tabloid papers, that the publisher of which has been waging a media war against Netanyahu since the 1990s. And that also has fallen apart. And the third one is that he accepted gifts from friends, which strangely is, completely legal in Israel. And yet he was indicted for breach of trust because the Attorney General, Avichai Mandelblit, claimed that he got too many cigars and bottles of champagne from Arnon Milchan, who's a Hollywood producer, actually gave far more of those things to now Foreign Minister Yair Lapid, but he was never indicted for that. So the first 2 charges have fallen apart, and the Attorney General is willing to end them. They were the reason why we ended up in governmental instability and sort of a whirlwind of 4 election campaigns that ended up ousting Netanyahu and bringing the far left and the Muslim Brotherhood's power in the current government. And they're going to be dropped. And Netanyahu is supposed to cop a plea for breach of trust, and then accept that his acts were done with perfidy, and as a result, he's banned from office for 7 years. And since he's 72
which was their aim. This is, I think, the key to understanding everything is that they're willing to drop all the criminal charges in exchange for his leaving office, because the aim from the beginning had nothing to do with criminal law. It was just a means in order to oust Netanyahu. And I think that something our American listeners probably don't know is that the man who brokered the deal is the retired are parallel of the Chief Justice, the President of the Supreme Court, we called him here, who is widely considered here to be the representative of the deep state, and has been, this is just the tip of an iceberg of a coup that began in the 90s, where he slowly maneuvered for the judiciary to take over more and more authority until it now holds sovereignty. It now holds final authority on anything, including the formation of an Israeli constitution. It's an unparalleled thing in any democracy in the West. And it's amazing that when Netanyahu decided to negotiate for a plea deal, he didn't go for any of the functionaries who are now in office. He went straight to this. If you ever needed a demonstration that there is a deep state, this is an informal structure where he is still the big don.
Right. And it's not only just that he's a big don. I mean, I said in a television interview earlier this week that what he is he's the head of the cult. He's the head of the legal cult in Israel, and it has its own rituals. It has its own gods. It has its own values. And the idea is, and which are not Zionists, they're anti-nationalist, they're post-Zionist, they're anti-Judaism, and they're very, very radical. And Barak believes that they're extremely progressive, that it's the role of the enlightened leaders of it's sort of a Platonic democracy of the enlightened guardians, that they're supposed to tell us what to do, inform our values, and that they can intervene on everything because they're judges and they're lawyers, and therefore they're vested with special knowledge and true values of what's truly good, and they know better than the people themselves. He said this explicitly many times. In fact, he calls it substantive democracy, and the people who make up that substance are the unelected judges and unelected lawyers who work for the government, and they get to lord over everybody as they've arrogated all executive and legislative powers away from Israel's elected officials. And as this has been going on, Lee, let's just open it up to you. You know, there's so many parallels with what happens and how the deep state and the American ruling class view democracy. How are you struck? Are you when you hear the news?
I have a question first, just for clarity. What was the first charge again? It wasn't. They changed it. I remember Gadi and I had spoken about this. They changed it from at first in exchange for favorable coverage, and then there was research finding that the coverage wasn't extraordinarily favorable. So what was the phrase then that they changed it to? How did it charge?
Unusual responsiveness.
Okay. Receptiveness
to Netanyahu's demands.
Right. So here's the issue as I see it. That's garbage language, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Israel, you are surrounded by obscurantism, right? Especially the Islamic Republic of Iran, right? What it's a regime based on a particular interpretation of Shia Islam, right? But look at the language, look at the beliefs around it. It's all garbage. It's all magical. Look at what we've been talking about regarding the Middle East for decades now, right? Whether it's Mossad spy sharks, whether it's IDF eagles captured in Turkey or something, and we laugh. It's funny. It's silly. But we see that these cultures we see what the problems with these cultures are. If you have these magical ideas, your culture, your society, your political culture has no basis to have discussions or make important decisions. What this looks like to me as an outsider looking in is this is obscurantist language, right? It's purpose to bring down someone's political career. What I can say from the United States is this fake language and these fake ideas have enormous consequences, which we're already starting to see here. I don't want to take us too far afield, but I'll just say, right, my book, The Plot Against the President and the Permanent Coup, they're both fundamentally about what I call the Russiagate operation, which was a FBI spying operation against a presidential campaign on behalf of another presidential campaign. But all the language made up about this, Trump is a Russian spy, so-and-so is a Russian spy. It was garbage language and garbage ideas. What I mean by real world consequences, if you look right now how there are Russian forces perched on Ukraine's borders. We see now what America's rivals have been looking at for the last 5 years, that these are not serious people. These are garbage people with garbage ideas. They've made up a story to target their own president. And now look at where they are. They can't do anything. Further, the Ukrainians, different Ukrainian officials and Ukrainian activists got involved. I mean, this lesson is historic. This will be taught for as long as foreign affairs are taught. The idea of a smaller power like Ukraine getting involved in domestic American politics to try to tilt the scales against one party, one president on behalf of another. And now look at where they are. They're entirely vulnerable to the person about whom they said was their main threat, and he was working in league with Donald Trump. Anyway, my fundamental point is this language, these ideas, once injected into the public sphere, the consequences are enormous. The consequences, we've already seen them here in the United States. I imagine the consequences for Israel will also be quite big. Look, I mean, we know that all these things that are happening in our domestic spaces, other people, you don't need clandestine service to look at how the Israeli establishment targeted Benjamin Netanyahu and what they did, what the language was, and what the purpose was. This is being seen by officials and spy services around the world, just as they looked at what was happening at the United States during the Trump years.
You know, I just to go back for a second to the Ukraine issue, because I think it's a double whammy in the sense that the anti-Russian hysteria that the FBI and the Democrats and the whole deep state apparatus in the United States just whipped the American people into over the Russiagate conspiracy really put America into this position where it doesn't have the ability to put together a coherent or a rational policy towards Putin and Russia. And so, yeah, Ukraine has, you know, they manipulated themselves into this crazy position with Putin, where they're about to, you know, they may very well lose their sovereignty completely, but the United States may find itself at war, you know, that it really doesn't, it's not clear. I mean, it's not that America has no national interest invested in Ukrainian sovereignty. It has some, but I'm not sure that it doesn't seem to me that it's weighty enough to go to war against Russia over. You know, this was not a Cold War scenario for war between the United States and Russia.
I think that the people who describe mostly people in Washington who describe this as a dire situation, and will the Biden administration have to invest resources and make war against Russia? I find that highly unlikely for any number of reasons. But the important thing is, as you said, the United States has no, after Donald Trump now, the United States has no real Russia policy, right? A serious Russian policy could have been something like, and by the way, one of the important things for people to understand is that by not taking any moves on Nord Stream 2, the Biden administration essentially greenlighted what Putin did regarding Ukraine. The larger point is just this, is that what we think of as domestic, having only domestic consequences, in fact, with powers like the United States and Israel, they have consequences for us far outside our borders. This language, obviously we know what they're saying about Netanyahu. We know that the language will shape the nature of Israeli politics, but it will also shape perceptions of how people understand Israel and how people understand Israel's place in the region.
You know, one of the things that I find troubling is that, you know, we had this incredible campaign that was started this week by one of the top right-wing commentators in Israel. And it was like a GoFundMe kind of page for Netanyahu's legal fees. And within 3 hours, they had raised over 1 million shekels. From the general public, people putting in, 50 shekel, 10 shekel, 100 shekel, 1,000 shekel donations. So it's mainly
which is
small
around
people.
$300,000
US
But
dollars.
it's the million concept is the same here as it is there. And over a 2-year period, a two-day period, they raised a total of 3 million, which is about $1 million from the public. And so it's a pretty substantial move. And it's a testament to how angry Israelis are over what's happening. How many Israelis are so angry, and they feel that the hounding of Netanyahu is really the hounding of them, because the concept is that he's their representative and he's being removed from office in a coup by unelected attorneys. So now that they're seeing the politicians and the same media that was behind this whole plot are now seeing that the work is finally about to end, that Netanyahu is going to be leaving the stage, and they're all saying, oh, now we can kiss and make up. And that the right-wing defectors who formed this radical government with the left and with the Muslim Brotherhood, they're going to break it up and they're going to go back to the right, and everything will be fine and all is well and all manners of things are well. And I think that, I don't know, obviously, what's going to happen. I don't have a crystal ball, but when you look at the level of sentiment, of anger, of rage that Netanyahu's 2 million supporters feel at what's happened, I think we're going to see much more of a disarray in our politics than we've experienced, even with our 4 successive elections. What is its situation? How would you describe the parallel situation in the United States between the right and the left, conservatives and progressives in the Biden administration?
Well, the Biden administration, there have been, we've seen even CNN reporters backing off the Biden administration because it's a sinking ship. I think one of the important things that I'll describe here very quickly, and I think there are probably similarities to the Israeli political scene. But the way that I've understood it is what we're looking at is a elite on the way out, right? The problem is you hear a lot of commentary on the right, and they're worried about the future of the United States. They're worried about the way America, and understandably, that things are not good right now. But the way that I understand this is America is still a strong country, still have people who love this country, who will sacrifice enormously for this country. The problem is the argument that I've made again, it's not the end of America, it's the end of this particular American elite. So it's a transition. And look, if you look at Joe Biden, people have compared Biden to the Andropov years of to Andropov himself in the Soviet Union. This man is a mummy. He barely exists as he's a mummy with an algorithm. And in that way, it's charming and funny to see what our AI geniuses can do. But insofar as this man is a real president managing the country, obviously not. And of course, it's very dangerous, because who are the people who are behind him pushing all sorts of various interests with Biden as a screen? All right, so it's a very dangerous moment here. But the reason, again, I'm optimistic about what's happening here is that we're seeing the end of a particular branch of the American elite. And I've heard, I'll leave it up to you guys, but my question is, I know that this has been a political conflict within Israel for decades. There is one elite, there's an Ashkenazi elite, but there's lots of other people in the country. So I'm interested to hear if there's if this elite is on its way out, or if it's feeling its oats now that it's appears to have thrust Benjamin Netanyahu out of the political arena forever.
I think that it had a big price. As Erel Segal here, a very interesting pundit here, commented. He said that this judicial oligarchy that went after Netanyahu went one bridge too far. And he said, when you try to hunt down Moby Dick, your own ship is in danger of sinking. And what happened with the Netanyahu trial is that it exposed them. It exposed their illegal methods. It exposed the way that they are trying to string together a ridiculous indictment. It's really in judicial matters, it's ridiculous. And it also exposed, which for me is one of the most interesting things, it exposed the press, because as I see it here, and it connects to the way I learned to see it from you, Lee, in the American arena, the press is a central arena of the coup. This is an info op. What really happened here, as far as I understand it, is not that the press is subordinate to law enforcement, is that the press has turned law enforcement into its investigative arms. And of course, it has
that's a nice way to put it, right?
It has enormous investigative powers, and therefore the leaks here, like in America, was the center of it all. Because what happened is, like in America, it started with an info op in Fusion GPS and all in the Democratic Party. Here, it started in the press, and then the investigation began. And if you look at it just pragmatically, not analytically, what actually happened is that the state produced dirt for the press to throw out at the public in the hope of hurting Netanyahu electorally. So I think this is the parallels are very striking.
I think one of the things that I find discouraging is that it's true that our ruling class in Israel and your ruling class in the United States have been discredited by what they did, by their coups against the elected leaders of both countries. But I'm not sure how they get shunted from power, because I mean, you do have here in particular, and I think to a very significant degree in the United States, I mean, you have people on the right and you have people on the left who have unbridgeable gaps between them, who have different values. And so, and it was always, in Israel, there was always, I wrote about this last week, there's always been this consensus among the Jews that we want a Jewish state, so that the question of demography was decisive. Are we going to maintain a Jewish majority or not? Can we, as Jews, maintain our sovereignty, our nation state in the land of Israel or not? And that was a numerical question, more or less. But now what we're seeing with this government is that it's a post-Zionist government, where you have a minority of Israel's Jews who have cut themselves off from the rest of the Jews and are willing, for the sake of power, to sacrifice the Zionist stream and form a government that's literally abandoning Israel's sovereignty in the Negev, which is 40% of the territory of the country, to the Muslim Brotherhood. And, and a whole host of other things are just sacrificing the Jewish identity of this country to the various radicals in the governing faction, in the governing coalition. And in the United States, you see, progressives who are literally going to war against the American people, against American history, against American parents, against American children, against American health system, and so on and so forth. And so the question is, how do you get rid of an elite when the people themselves, who are not part of the ruling class, are so polarized or so divided?
I would say Israel has a big advantage over the United States in this one count. But it doesn't have to do with. I mean, yeah, it's a proudly nationalist state, as are many Americans still, regardless of what our progressive elite says. The advantage that Israel has is that Israel has the Bible. By which I mean it's not just that values come from the Bible, but the Bible is also a story. It's a history that explains what happens throughout history, right? And what is the story that keeps happening? The problems of the Jewish people, right? The problems with their leadership, the problems, what they turn from and what they turn to. So I think, and of course, for many Americans, especially evangelicals, and who understand our own experience on the basis of what Israel has gone through for thousands of years. I think those people have a huge advantage over those of us who see, look, American history is still really short. I mean, we're the oldest democracy in the world, but not even 250 years old yet. So what are the different changes? What are the different transitions that we'll go through? And I think we're seeing a profoundly transitional time now. But does it mean that American history is coming to an end? No. And I don't think it means that that Israel as a Jewish state, is either, of course it's coming under threat. But again, that's why the Bible is valuable. We see this. It's a history of how people fight for their beliefs. Hey, don't you understand? You turn from God. Here's what happens. The prophets are screaming again. Here's what's going on. So that's how I think that Israel has an advantage over many Americans who are concerned about where our country is going right now. And yet there are other Americans who do see it like that.
I gave a lecture to a group of pre-army aged kids who are in a leadership school last week, and we had just read in the Torah portion of the week about Moses getting the eve of leaving Egypt, going out of the Exodus, and Rabbi Sachs, the recently departed chief rabbi of Britain, wrote a beautiful piece about it where he was explaining that Moses said to the children of Israel 3 times, the night that they're leaving, the most unbelievable event that in human history, right, where God is taking a nation of slaves out of the global superpower and destroying the global superpower, and this is something that's nuts. And so instead of living that moment 3 times during the portion of the Torah that we read that week, Moses says to them, and you will tell your children, and you will tell your children, and you will tell your children. And it's all about turning this into history. What does it mean? What will it mean through the ages? And so Rabbi Sachs explained that the United States and Israel are these 2 countries that created themselves, these 2 nations that created themselves by acts of will that were sort of against the laws of nature. And their survival depends on the retelling of their story. And that's why, for instance, the 1619 Project is so disastrous, because if you have a generation of Americans, or for that matter, of Jews who have no idea what their story is, and they're not going to retell it, and then the nations will disappear. And so, I think that is an existential threat. I think the lack of history, the revision of Jewish history, the revision of American history, by these progressives is an existential threat, specifically to these 2 self-defined nations, self-created nations.
What we're watching right now, the way I understand it, is we're watching a campaign of demoralization and desecration, and it's as if we're under an occupying power, because this is what occupying powers do. I actually believe this is an occupying power, because they go into a civilization. If you look especially at the 1619 Project, that should be seen in the George Floyd riot should be seen in the context of the 1619 Project, right? 1619 Project, it's not just some crazy thing cooked up by some nut, right? This has the backing of the New York Times. This has the backing of of the American establishment, right? It's an occupying power. They're tearing down our monuments. They're attacking our history, our stories. So it's not just values, right? It's not just we're going to teach these crazy things in public school. No, it's a total campaign of desecration, right? That's where it goes. But then again, the country is larger than New York Times readers, right? The United States is. And it appears to me that Israel is a larger country than the people who read Gadi. I know, I'm sorry, it's not a swipe. I know you're still writing for Haaretz, but it's more than the readers of Haaretz. So there are people who tell these stories, right? There are people who understand our history and where we're from. And those people, I think, My belief is those people, I certainly feel this way, those people, it's not only do they have our real story in their head, they understand that this is a profound moment in our history. And it is a blessing to be alive at this time and to be engaged in this struggle, right, for our country against what is effectively an occupying power. So they not only know the story, they're involved in it, they're engaged in it, and they're using it as a source to continue the fight right now.
So, well, Gadi, you chime in. I'm stealing your thunder too.
Yeah, I share Lee's optimism in some fundamental sense, and that sense is that I look at society and not just at the power structures, and I think that both the American society and Israel society have enormous powers of vitality and are not going to give in to this forever. And especially in the case of Israel, where my sense is more intuitive, Israelis are fundamentally democratic. And the fact that we now expose the undemocratic means, right, of this coup and the undemocratic goals of this coup, it's something that will take a while to reverberate. As I think many things in America will take time to reverberate, especially because these elites get more arrogant and more clumsy in the way they try to impose their values and their narratives. And they got into, my knowledge of this is not yet up to speed, but the way the American elites wove the January 6th narrative is just, now you see the seams. It's not, we're after Russian collusion, which turned out to be a hoax. We're after the laptop from hell and the way they suppressed the story right before the election. And the still, it's like Big Brother is still blurring through the megaphones, but we've seen the old man behind the curtain. And eventually this must have an effect here as well as there. So, Caroline, I'm on the more optimistic side in the long run.
You know, just one last thing, and I'd love it if Lee would also chime in. I mean, one of the things that bothers me or concerns me about what we're living through in Israel and in the United States is the absence of an accounting. You know, you had in the United States, you have the John Durham probe, which people, you know, after being really optimistic and hopeful about it in like 2019, realized that this wasn't going to actually bring about any accounting for what had just happened to the United States. And now it's in dribs and drabs, you know, coming out with and here, you know, you see that the coup plotters in Israel are all getting rewarded with plum jobs that are so absurd. Like one of them, who was a truly post-Zionist, horrible woman named Dina Zilber in the Attorney General's office, she just got a radio show where she gets to say what it means to be Israeli. Like that's literally the name of her show.
But
you know,
but Caroline, don't you see that they are becoming ridiculous, and most Israelis are looking at this and thinking to themselves, "This is
that's
a
your
sham."
answer. Your answer is that the accounting is that the public just doesn't take them serious anymore, that it's not a matter of them having to be, you know, called to public account and in a court of law or in an inquiry or some sort of another, where they're actually forced to give an accounting for what they did, where they have to pay a public price or a criminal price for what they did, because in the United States nobody is either, you know, not really.
But it came close, and the whole story exploded like this, right? Lee's first book is Devin Nunes exposing this using a parliamentary committee, which we don't have.
But they're in charge, and Devin Nunes is leaving Congress.
Yeah.
The accounting that you are talking about, look, I still hope we have more of an accounting for Durham. From Durham, you know, I'm optimistic about this, though maybe I shouldn't be. Time will tell.
Maybe I should be more optimistic. I hope I'm the one who's just being overly pessimistic here.
But this is a political accounting and a political accountability which fits into the nature of American politics insofar as we have all sorts of checks and balances. It's not just the three branches of governments, right? The two different parties are part of that check and balance. If you do this to us, this will happen to you, right? But there's another kind of accounting too. And the other kind of accounting is a moral accounting. And I assure you, there will be a moral accounting. After what we've seen for the last 2 years and the devastation that the American oligarchy has let loose, unleashed on the American public, I guarantee you there will be moral accountability for that. There is no doubt in my mind that this will happen. Am I happy when I see Andrew McCabe or Peter Strzok get a book deal or get some? No, I think that's bad. I think it's bad taste. I think it's ugly. I think it's vulgar. I think it's wrong, right? But these are all side issues. There's something much larger that's going on, and there's something incredibly large that will happen. This is a country that's been devastated for 2 years by this stuff. The idea that somehow, as the tide will turn, that Americans will say, well, you know, Dr. Fauci meant well, didn't he? I mean, he didn't mean to do all these things to us to destroy our businesses. I mean, we got to give the guy a break. You know, he was doing his best, wasn't he? These things will not happen. There will be a serious moral accounting, and may God have mercy on the people who are on the other end of it.
Well, you know, one of the things that we've seen, in the United States, as it's gotten more woke, as the progressives have become more entrenched in the halls of government, is that America is becoming more anti-Semitic, and this is something new. This is something that really we hadn't seen real political anti-Semitism. We'd seen a lot of anti-Semites in politics, but the use of anti-Semitism as an organizing tool in the United States and American politics is something we certainly haven't. I mean, maybe you had that a bit, or to a certain degree, in the 1920s. With the Aliens Act and the isolationism and Charles Lindbergh,
sure.
and Coughlin and Henry Ford and all those Michiganders, but we see it to a much larger degree now in the United States. You had over 100 Democratic senators and lawmakers in 2018 that wrote letters of support to the committee, or to the Council on American Islamic Relations, CAIR, which is an unindicted co-conspirator in the Holy Land Fund terror financing case of 2008. They're a Hamas front group. They raised money for Al Qaeda. And yet, you know, they've also been pushing for the release from prison of what's her name, Siddiqui.
Siddiqui.
Yes, and who was a subject of the hostage taking at Beth Israel congregation outside of Fort Worth on Shabbat. As a result, you know, you see that the FBI itself was denying initially that it was an anti-Semitic attack, which was just insane and perfidious. And Biden still said they can't figure out why he was using all that anti-Semitic and anti-Israeli language. So, I mean, I think this is something very new in American politics, and you know, I'd like your take on it.
Well, and you know, as you mentioned, anti-Semitism and the idea that there are anti-Semitic politicians. This is not new. This is, this has been going on for a long time. We love and praise Israel or praise the United States as a country that is, you know, philo-Semitic, based on the Bible, loves Israel, and that's true. But there's also, a lot of anti-Semitism here, and always has been. No, what you're talking about is largely a function of immigration, actually, where this is anchored in immigration patterns. We're rightly concerned about immigration coming across our southern border, but there's another kind of immigration as well that's shaping the character of the United States, and this is immigration from the Middle East. It's immigration from Pakistan. It's immigration from Africa. some and from from majority Muslim countries, where anti-Semitism is built into those political cultures, and those political cultures are coming here. And I think that most people will recognize this. I mean, all we have to do is point to two different members of Congress, Democratic members of Congress, Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib. So if we look at that, this is one of the big things that's going on. If you look at a place like Dearborn, Michigan, right? Who thought it was a good idea to give 35,000 Hezbollah supporters U.S. passports? Clearly, someone in the State Department thought that was a good idea, right? So that's what's happening. This Democratic Party anti-Semitism is anchored in the recent immigration patterns of the United States.
What about the Red Green Alliance, where you have that? Like change.org had a online petition that got over 30,000 votes calling for the release of Siddiqui from U.S. prison, from federal prison. I mean, you have this conflation of the far left and the Islamists.
They'll start doing it again. I mean, but as we know, anti-Israel activism is one of the centerpieces of the left, right? And it has been for a long time. Something that someone was telling me several years ago, which was fascinating. He was saying, we think that a lot of this activism on school campuses is coming from sort of crazy left-wing white kids, either Jewish kids or someone out, from some hippies out in California. It's not. These are anchored by these organizations are run by Muslim kids who are born in the United States, but whose parents come from the Middle East, they come from Pakistan, they come from Africa. So that's a very large part of what's going on. And this has been, and look at what happened within the last 6 months, right? The Biden administration airlifted 150,000 Afghanistanis to the United States, right? This is not going to help.
Unvetted, yeah.
Right, unvettable, right?
Unvettable.
It's not possible to vet them unless they actually helped out the United States, or they committed a crime, or they're on some terror watch list. Otherwise, Afghanistan they're not keeping records of farmers, or they don't know no one knows who these people are, and they're being moved all around the country. Anyway,
but now they're holding the American records of all collaborators with the American occupation. That's one of the most horrible human rights violations that I can think of in recent years.
But I think that's where a lot of our, you're talking about Afia Siddiqui. I mean, they'll start, Linda Sarsour. I've seen, I've seen lots of news about how she was one of the people who was demanding her release. So this is a popular cause in different sectors of the United States, and I guarantee you that they will return to defending and demanding the release of Afia Siddiqui. Like after this cools down a little bit, they'll go back to it and they'll find different ways to start rallying around this. I mean, they've been rallying on behalf of on behalf of Hamas people, on behalf of Hezbollah people. As I said, how many Hezbollah supporters can one Michigan town support? As it turns out,
how much do you think that this actually informed the American decision to surrender Afghanistan to the Taliban? You think it had anything to do with what happened in Afghanistan and the humiliating way that the United States withdrew from there? Or
you mean
do you think that it's not really? I mean, the Islamization of the Democratic Party through this immigration and through the Red Green Alliance of these immigrants and the far left.
No, I don't think that informed it. Look, I've been writing about this for, after being an early defender of the war in Afghanistan. I considered it the most corrupting and corrupt war in American history. So I was keen for us to get out. I was keen for Donald Trump to withdraw forces. It was another indication of how tied up he was by the by deep state operatives. So I actually as the withdrawal was insane, leaving something like 40. 80-something billion worth of US arms. I mean, everything
Right.
from, everything from aircraft to something that people skip over all the time are these night vision goggles, which are really, really important. So that's disastrous. But getting out of Afghanistan itself, I think that was, it was an idea whose time had come.
Do you think that there was a better way to have done it?
Ago.
Do you think it was a better way to have done it? I mean,
Yeah,
you think a competent president would have done it competently, that it would be possible?
Yes, absolutely. I think it would have been possible. I mean, there was inevitably going to be some chaos with the withdrawal. But I mean, what people say, it's like, well, why would you shut down Bagram? Why do you get the army out first? The point is to get up the different people. The other thing is like, why were we intent on airlifting hundreds of thousands of Afghanis out of there and into the United States? Right? I mean, there was absolutely no need for that at all. Look, if we had hundreds of thousands of people who were really helping U.S. troops, then that war would have been won. That war would have been won within 3 years. But no, there weren't that many Afghanis who were helping American forces there.
When you look at the situation of the American Jews, and I mean, in 3 years, we've had 4 attacks on synagogues. We had the massacre at the kosher supermarket in New Jersey. And there's more anti-Semitism, or there's more palpable anti-Semitism in sort of in the air in the United States than at any time since the Second World War.
It's gonna get worse and worse and worse. And I'll tell you why.
Why is that?
It's not foreign policy. It's because of the same thing that we were talking about before regarding the language that they used in the indictment of Netanyahu. Once they start turning around language and using it like this has always been the danger. Look at what happened with the Iran deal. The Iran deal legitimized, it wasn't just the nuclear weapons program. It legitimized the regime that embodies anti-Semitism, right? Saying, okay, we're making a lot of room here for all the nuts. Iran is now going to be an American partner. That in itself legitimized anti-Semitism. The more crazy a place gets, right? I mean, this is one way we understand anti-Semitism, right? It's like, I put it as it's the form that unreason takes in modern politics, right? Okay. The crazier and crazier people are getting with stuff, whether it's COVID lockdowns, whether it's COVID regulations, the nuttier and nuttier our politicians get, national officials, state and local officials, the more irrational that their edicts become, the more and more we will see anti-Semitism. This is inevitable. These things go hand in hand. I have no doubt it's about to get worse. And again, it's not because of anything that Israel is doing anywhere in the world. It's not because of anything that Jews are doing anything in the world. It is the nature of madness.
I mean, what were you going to say, Gadi?
I was going to say that I think Jews in America are contributing to the fire of anti-Semitism when they start attacking national identities, when they are giving credence to the anti-Zionist BDS movement, when they're basically joining anti-Western forces. And then the backlash, we can't then weed out and say, look, this is a justified criticism of George Soros, but don't hate Jews in general. It's lamentable that, and this is a streak in the Jewish people that's been lamentable since the Hellenic Empire, that we have a particularist national and an internationalist streak. And when a religion has international or universal aspirations, it's one thing, but when a nation has universal aspirations, it's another thing. And it's lamentable that Jews have been such a dominant presence in the Bolshevik Revolution, and they're such a dominant presence in the globalist movement. And backlash is to be expected. Look, there was the hijacking of of a rabbi in a Texas synagogue this week, and this is a rabbi I just saw on Facebook who said Israel is an apartheid state, and who taught his flock not to carry guns, so and not to come with them to the synagogue. So there you go, and he's been teaching them that Israel treats Islam unfairly, and now he has an Islamic terrorist kidnap him. So we look at it from here, and I think Zionism has managed to make Jewish existence coherent. America has the potential to do that too, if Jews, as other people, accept the national identity and the commitment to the state. If they attack the very, and Caroline and I have been talking about it repeatedly, that those Jews who are anti-Zionists are often anti-American in the same sense.
Well, in the same way
reasons.
in the same way that anti-Semitic non-Jews are often anti-American as well. I mean, it's the same thing. I think. I mean, I think.
But Caroline, Americans would be hated as Americans, and American Jews are going to be hated as Jews. I'm not defending this. It's not that it's fair, but what I'm saying is it's to be expected. The price of a George Soros is also anti-Semitism.
Right, but what I'm saying is that, with all due respect to self-hating Jews and to Jews who think that,
and there is a lot of respect, I know you have.
No, it's all due respect, and with all due respect to the idea that Jews are contributing to Jew hatred or justifying Jew hatred. I don't think that neo-Nazis need George Soros to hate Jews, and I don't think that the Ilhan Omers and Lindas Sarsours and the Siddiquis of the world need Jewish Voice for Palestine or whatever it's called to hate Jews and to hate Israel. Yeah, whatever, to hate Jews. And I don't think that Louis Farrakhan needs the ACLU, Jewish lawyers to say that that Judaism is a gutter religion and that Jews are termites. I just don't think that it's the Jews themselves that are fomenting this. What I do think.
No, but why would they help? Why would they help? And
not a question of helping. I think the problem is that if you don't have strong Jewish awareness of what's going on, if you have Jewish self-delusion on the altar of universalism that's blinding Jews from the danger that's shooting them in the head, then anti-Semitism is going to expand. I mean, if the FBI is going to continue to deny anti-Semitism, even as rabbis and congregants at Shabbat services are being held hostage. Because if you don't have coherent Jewish voices in the United States saying this cannot stand, and we oppose Muslim anti-Semitism, and we oppose white supremacist anti-Semitism, and we oppose Black anti-Semitism, all the same way, then nobody is going to feel any fire under their butt to actually do anything to stop it. I think that that's where the Jewish universalists are harming, is that they're making it more difficult to get authorities to actually do something to protect Jews and to protect America from anti-Semites and the irrationality that they spew and that they advance.
I think look, I don't think it's that fragile a time in the United States right now for Jews, but there are a lot of people. There are a lot of people who are looking to put the Jews in a bad way. I wrote a piece for Tablet explaining how about how there are different Washington D.C. bureaucrats, counterterrorism experts who are keen to put the Jews in the middle of the deep state's attack on Trump supporters post January 6th, and I think that's extremely dangerous. And my colleagues at Tablet agreed that this is a very bad thing. And so, I mean, again, I'm not going to say it's the Jews are getting people mad at them and increasing anti-Semitism. I just think that there must be a way to understand a broader scope of history. The things that have happened before will happen again. That's what I mean about the madness And that's also what I mean about understanding political context. The Jews are a minority, and there are different actions that minorities take. And some of them are well informed by history, and others are less well informed by history.
To be sure. To be sure. Well, I think one of the things that we're finding is that, there are, and I don't know, maybe it's true in other countries. I think that Europe is so far along in losing their democracies with the EU project that it's very difficult to look at them for parallels. But I think that there are so many striking parallels between Israel and the United States, and what's happening in the United States and its impact on American Jews, what's happening among American Jews and that impact on America, that it does seem that the fates of both people are just completely intertwined, I don't know. I mean, do you think so? We only have a couple more minutes. So Lee, let me just ask you, I know you said you're optimistic. But where do you see the change coming from? Do you see a change coming from the elections? Do you see the change coming in the culture? How do you see it coming about in the United States? Where do you see it?
Elections are important. Elections are very important. But I've been saying since 2020, it's like there's no redemption in politics. I mean, it's very important to run the right candidate. But people have been saying we need to have the right slate of candidates. We need to have the right people running for positions on the Hill. I'm like, we need to build local leadership. And by that, I mean, we need to regain our strengths. And our strengths have to do with families and communities. And this is one of the things that COVID has desecrated. People have not been able to go to church. They've not been able to go to the synagogue. Kids have not been able to go to school. They haven't been able to play sports. They haven't been able to go to movies. They haven't been able to do any of the things that bring us together as Americans, right? That show that, well, there are other things aside from politics. We're all out here coaching the little league team, or coaching, or teaching a band or something like that. All those things have been taken away from us. We need to have those things back. We need to build our communities. We need to make our communities strong. We need to make our towns strong. That's the way to start right there. That's the way to build. That's the way to build real resilience. It's not through politics. People complain all the time, rightly so. The GOP, a bunch of clowns. They won't do anything. They're fake. The GOP establishment. They're controlled opposition. Yeah, they are. But again, the salvation of this, or the redemption of this country, is not going to come on Capitol Hill, right? These are the representatives of the American people. What are the American people going to do, right? Donald Trump is not the answer, nor is Ron DeSantis. The answer is the American people. But to figure that out, we have to go back and figure out which way they're going. I'd like it to happen soon, because I'd like things to turn around very quickly in time for the midterms, in time for 2024. But I don't think that we're about to fall off a cliff. There is urgency, but I think the most important thing is, again, that Americans within families, within communities, that we go back and we recognize our real sources of strength, because the real campaign is to weaken us. It's not just to take our money and hand it to Democratic Party favorites. It's a campaign of demoralization and desecration. So what are our strengths? What are the things we do to keep our families and communities strong? That's what. There's no redemption in politics.
I think you're right. Looking at things from an Israeli perspective, I mean, when Lee and I were chatting before we started this episode filming, you mentioned the Serbian tennis player who was expelled from Australia, and this became like this huge international story. And I said, this is just an expression of you could say your word, obscurantist discourse that has taken hold, that foreign policy ends up being about stupid things. We know as the threats to our security enumerate. I mean, it's the same thing as Yair Lapid, our idiot foreign minister. He enumerated the achievements of his incredible foreign policy, which was like, 50,000 hits for our statement on Instagram. I had 15 interviews in the media, and this guy on TV said, well, if you're going by numbers, then Gal Gadot has a more successful foreign policy than the state of Israel does. I mean, but and he was right, right? But it's stupid. And I mean, it's the same thing with turning the biggest story in foreign affairs into the, into the Australians being so insane about COVID that they throw out a tennis star.
I think it's the biggest story in foreign affairs, or it represents what's the big thing in foreign affairs. Because again, there is a political sphere where different things are happening, but there are other things. There's enormous shifts taking place. The governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, whom a lot of people look to believe may challenge Donald Trump for the Republican Party nomination in 2024. DeSantis, a couple of months ago, was talking about Australia and the lockdowns there and what they're doing to Australian citizens. He said, can you believe what's happening in Australia? This is almost as bad as China, right? Here's a difference. Australia has been an American ally for centuries, right? Australia has fought alongside the United States in more wars than the UK has. This is a traditional American ally, and you have a popular governor of the state of Florida saying, "What's going on there?" So when we come out of this, is Australia going to be seen the same way by the American public? Will the United Kingdom? Will Canada? What will that mean in terms of the American alliance system? What is it going to look like in 2, 3, 4, 5 years? That's what I mean. There are things that are happening right now, whether it's the Biden administration wanting to get back into the Iran nuclear deal, or whether it's a tennis player who can't get in to play a big tournament in Australia. There are things on the surface and there are things that are happening underneath. And these are the things that are going to have a real consequential effect on foreign affairs for the rest of our lifetimes, without a doubt.
Well, on that happy note, right? Well, Gadi, why don't you take the last word today?
I think it's a good note. Things are changing.
Yeah, I think, Lee. I think
Gadi's optimistic. I'm going to let him say why it's good.
Okay.
I was just going to say that I need you once in a while here because I'm trying to inject some optimism into Caroline. But I must say for her that most of her warnings turned out to be how do you say sofot atid, Caroline?
I'm a prophet.
No, prescient.
Yeah, okay, prescient is good. I like prophetic.
I never knew how to pronounce this one. So on this prophetic note,
all right, no, I have to end it. Okay, so if you enjoyed this episode, make sure that you subscribe to the Caroline
and get some more optimism.
Right, so that I'll bring in more happy-go-lucky kind of guys like Lee Smith. Can you imagine how horrible I must be if Lee Smith is the Pollyanna next to me?
I'm not a Pollyanna.
I know I'm terrible.
Look, it's not that I think we're not in a bad time or in a bad place. I'm just saying, I look at the other side and their weakness. I'm like, they're not serious. They can do a lot of danger. They've already done a tremendous amount of damage, right? But it's extremely fragile. Who was it? It's like the way Ben Gurion spoke about Lebanon. He said it's a broken reed. Our elite is a broken reed. It looks to me like your elite is also a broken reed. What does that mean?
They're very powerful though, but they are broken. I think you're absolutely right. And we have
dangerous.
God, and we have God. So there you go.
And the Bible. I mean, really. Yeah. I mean, let people understand how history actually unfolds.
All right. Well, I appreciate that. I think our viewers will appreciate that. I think Gadi appreciates you. He's like a Lee Smith groupie, and it's well earned.
Nice.
It's well deserved. Nice. I'm a groupie too. I'm just not as nice about
it. That's very nice. Thank you, guys, and thank you very much for inviting me on today. This was a lot of fun.
We'll have to do it again.
Thank you, Lee.
I look forward to it.
All right. Take care, everybody.
And all of you come and visit us here in the States.
Okay. All right. Bye-bye. God bless.
At CPAC. Bye-bye.
Yeah.